Very nice.
All right, so the media conference for S.45. This is the third year that I've been chairing the House Agriculture Committee, and the first time that we've ever had a committee conference. So don't know previous to my tenure here how often that happened, but my first go around anyway. We've got, maybe we should just do introductions for the public. We all know each other, but David Durfee, Chair of the House Agriculture Committee from Shaftesbury.
Martin Malone, Chair of the House Judiciary Committee from South Burlington.
I'm Leland Morgan, member of this committee, represent Grand Isle County and the western portion of Milton.
Bob Norris, Senator from Franklin County. I Vice Chair, Judiciary and sit on Appropriations.
And I'm Rob Plunkett, Senator from Bennington, Vice Chair of Institution, and sit on agriculture.
Senator Russ Ingalls, Chair of Agriculture, serving the Essex District, 25 towns and a king. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, thank you for making the trip upstairs and into unfamiliar territory in the House Committee rooms. So I want to just start by acknowledging that we passed a bill that's quite different from the bill that passed out of the Senate. We want to give the Senate folks an opportunity to say what you want to say. My feeling is, and I'll just say this right up front, the bill that we passed is the compromise bill that we can get through. And I had several conversations with the agency and with folks in the Senate saying, this is, if we're going to do something, this is going to be it. I am hopeful that if the committee could sometime today produce a conference report that was our bill, the bill we passed, and hopefully we could get that through today. Not 100% confident, knowing how tenuous the support was when we voted it out earlier. Tenuous in this committee, and then ran it through fairly quickly on the House floor to get it passed. So that's our position right now, is the bill that we passed. Let's stop there because that's about all there is to say, I think, for us.
We all set?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, first of all, Chair Durfee, as usual, the Senate thought that we passed you the perfect bill.
Yeah.
But obviously it didn't turn out that way in your minds here. And we do have some concerns with the bill as it was passed in ag, along with how it came out on the floor. And I don't think that they're big concerns, but being from Franklin County, I can assure you that, and there's other members that come from agricultural communities, that there's certain things here that we need to, I guess, look at once again. I see where the trespass notice was stricken from the bill. We looked at it in judiciary that as the trespass, the nuisance, and more so the rebuttable presumption, which was huge, that both the House and the Senate agreed that we should just leave that alone and just take it out of it. So I guess we would like to know, we have a recommendation or two. If in fact, after we listen, we'd like to know in your mind as to why was the trespass removed from the bill. That'd be nice to, I guess, explain that to us. We have a better understanding as to why.
Why we removed trespass?
Yes.
Well, I will say there was no, I think the committee was unanimous on this, and no interest in changing the trespass law. We took testimony, as I think you did too, and I'm pretty sure you did in the Judiciary Committee, from a lawyer, a professor of law who had concerns that I think brought up in your committee too, about the constitutionality. But more than that, I think we didn't see that there's a need to be changing that part of law. So we wanted to focus just on what could we do, if anything, to the nuisance part.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess I'm looking on page 5 under the House proposal of amendment, which would be 2C 2 and 3. Those we identified as areas of concern from our side of the hallway here.
2C2 and 3.
Yep. The agricultural activity, along with the agricultural activity, has a noxious and significant interference as to the verbiage or why, I should say.
Yeah, so that verbiage, that's existing language in statute. It's language that's struck from earlier section in the rebuttable presumption section. So I think that's on,
Page 4, about a third of the way down. Where it begins the presumption that the ag activity does not constitute a nuisance, may be rebutted by showing, etc.
sorry, can you just?
Page 4, the side by side,
Yeah, yeah.
about a third of the way down.
Oh, on the left side, okay, yeah, thank
It's on both sides.
both sides, okay.
It'd be the underlying section, Mike, we're looking at here, no agriculture activity shall be. Or
It's struck.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay, thank you.
It, because it was in the House version moved, in your version, Senator Norris, it was removed.
And I have one more before I turn it over to my other senators here is, do we have a definition of noxious in the state? How does that?
We can ask pledge council. I don't think that there's a definition in statute.
I was specifically asked over the past couple of days to look at ways to define that. And first, I looked to the broader jurisprudence nationally to see what other states have a noxious standard, and there are not many, if any. And then I looked to the court opinions of the Vermont Supreme Court, and they basically all say it's a fact-specific determination. You have to look at the evidence and the effect of each alleged activity to determine if it will, in fact, be noxious.
Thank you. I guess I'll turn it over to see if my fellow senators have any questions.
I could say while you're thinking, if you want, if you don't mind my jumping in, that just going back to my answer about where that language came from, and pointing out that this existing language. What we were doing, and I realized you weren't there for the full report that I gave the other day. So I'll say in a couple of minutes what I told the House, what this bill was doing. And it's not immediately obvious from looking at, as it often is the case, it's not immediately obvious what is being changed here ultimately. And we wanted to expand the protection that farmers have to include instances where they change the type of farming that they're doing. I think that's also something that you all have wanted to do. So any kind of change to methods or crops being raised or livestock. And then also if you had new land that was not currently or wasn't previously being used for agriculture. Right now, if you decide to start farming next to somebody's house, you don't enjoy that protection. So we wanted to change that. And then the third thing we wanted to change was the section that has the rebuttable presumption, but beyond the rebuttable presumption, also the current requirement that the farmer be responsible for basically defending themselves rather than the neighbor or the plaintiff having the burden of proof. So we took the existing language without wanting to change the existing language, but shifted that burden of proof. So that's a longer answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm ready to go if you want
I did want to ask a little bit more about that, and Chair Durfee, I think you might have just answered it, but in terms of I'll call them the piercing provisions of the protection, which were two of them were part of overcoming the presumption. And essentially, is it correct that you all the House had just carried it over and didn't dive deeply into either one of those from, I suppose, a legal or perhaps practical standpoint, but just
either one of.
So agricultural activity has a substantial adverse effect on health, safety, or welfare, or the activity is obnoxious and significant interference. So those two carried over from the prior rebuttable presumption. Did you dive deeply into either one of those in terms of?
We did not, no, and I don't know whether judiciary
Yeah.
did. So just the path that Bill took, it went to judiciary and what happened there, and I wasn't following it closely. We then got a draft and began looking at the more ag pieces, I guess I would say. But I don't know if you, right?
We did not take a deep dive as far as noxious and significant interference at the time. We, if I'm recalling correctly, we did add back the adverse effect on health, safety, and welfare. We did do that. Certainly since then, my view of the noxious and significant interference language is that it has been in law for a very long time, and the law as it has existed for a very long time also put the burden on the farmers. It also didn't let them change their activities, and it still had this additional language. And now the bill, in fact, shifts the burden as Chair Durfee said, and takes away any kind of prohibition on changes. And I think it's fairly obvious when a court looks at this that we're saying if first of all the plaintiff has to show that the RAPs are not being followed, they have to show that there's not compliance with those agricultural processes, and if they're unable to do that, there's this protection against nuisance and an unreasonable substantial impact to the enjoyment of one's property. It's pretty clear with this additional language that it's a heightened burden. It's not, you can't just show nuisance. It has to be more. So when the court's going to look at this, they're going to understand that noxious is a whole other level that has to be shown. That's beyond what I would consider your standard nuisance claim. So that makes me comfortable that this is something that is more than the nuisance that would have to be proven by a plaintiff. And when you combine that with the burden shifting, I think that it does provide more protection for farmers than certainly what we have in current law.
I just had one quick follow-up, and I think, Mike, you gave us that the definition of the generally accepted agricultural practices really hasn't been defined in law, so we'd be looking for litigation to establish that.
That's correct. That fourth category that you're adding in that definition, what is a generally accepted agricultural practices, those practices conducted in a manner consistent with proper and accepted customs and standards followed by similar operators. You can see that there's already in law, in order to meet the rebuttable presumption, and you can see this on page 4, top of the page, it's struck language. It says it is consistent with good agricultural practices. There was no standard for what good agricultural practices were. It was something that would often be just argued in front of the court. Packing your apple crates at 11 o'clock at night is not a good agricultural practice, but it might be a necessity for that business, and considering the season and the need to ship, et cetera. So what you both did, both the House and the Senate, is to more clearly define what generally accepted agricultural practices are. It's meeting the RAPs. It's meeting the CAFO permit if you have to get a CAFO permit and you're no longer subject to the RAPs. It's meeting your pesticide rule. And then it's meeting what the customs and practices and standards are for similar operators for ag activities in the state. Now that doesn't have a black and white test that you can go to right now. You will be again, it's going to be something that the court will take testimony on. The court will use experts. The court will the defendant, the farmer, will probably bring their own witnesses to say, this is something that is very common to do in this area. And I used the example the other day that it will vary across the state because in Bennington, the soils in parts of Bennington are very sandy. But in Addison, the soils can be very clay. And so the practices that you're going to use in those two different areas are going to be different. And so whether it's practice that's consistent with proper and accepted customs and standards is going to depend on where you are, type of farming, how you're farming, et cetera.
So there's a reason why in the 3 years, Chair Durfee, that you haven't had a conference, committee of conference, and I get it. This is a big deal. I mean, this is really is. It's the first substantial bill as far as to protect farmers that's been trying to be passed for better than 10 or 15 years. It really, really is. As we look to expand farming in this state, we're $5.8 billion now within this state, probably a little bit higher than that. We're hearing complaints we've heard a complaint the other day. I'm sure one of your members probably relayed to you about a strawberry farmer over in St. Albans on a little 4-acre patch getting harassed. A farmer who's not using pesticides, not doing anything, getting harassed by their neighbors because they're too busy on their little small strawberry patch. We have big farmers, we have small farmers. We're trying to grow, we're trying to cultivate lands that haven't been farmed for a lot of years. And we have big farmers, small farmers. We're trying to support them all, and we're trying to keep them from being harassed. And I think that this bill is almost there. I'm going to get right to the point of what bothers me about this bill. I have respect for all what you guys have done. I really do. I think that we're close of getting something done. My part of this bill is on page 5, section 2, on subsection C, and it's number 2 and 3. If we can somehow determine how we can make that not so subjective, and because we can't really define the word noxious. We can't really, if that's just subjective, and that's what it is. Oh, that's noxious to me. Everybody says, well, but you have enough protections in this bill so that it shouldn't matter. Well, they're going to file or whatever, but that still doesn't stop a farmer, large or small. And I'm concerned more about the small farmer than I am the large farmer, from having to go and defend themselves from something that somebody is saying that makes me noxious. I've got hay fever because you haven't cut your hay in time. So that is just too subjective for me. If we could come up with a solution there, I would say to my people, hey, let's sign off on this thing and let's pass this bill. Other than that, I'm willing to hang it on a wall.
We took a lot of testimony from farmers, and some of them were neighbors of farmers. Some of the farmers who came in to testify were also farmers, the neighbors of farmers. And I would say that the concerns that we heard about the bill, and it wasn't about our version or your version, it was more general concern that was expressed about having protection from nuisance claims, was that the large farmers would somehow do something that would make it more difficult for the small farmers. We didn't have testimony from the general public, neighbors of farmers, which I think is probably too bad that we weren't able to find people off the street. I will say we did not go deliberately to ask the neighbor in a case that we're all familiar with, that I think maybe you heard from and maybe you did too. So we didn't hear from that or from any other neighbor. Interestingly, and I'm going to get to your point in a second, Senator Ingalls, but we asked the Farm Bureau, we asked NOFA Vermont, we asked the Dairy Producers Alliance and Rural Vermont to either bring us witnesses or testify themselves. And we heard from some of those organizations that some didn't want to testify because they didn't have a unified position on it. And others came and said, we actually don't support this. We ask farmers, our members every year, what are you concerned about? What would you like to see happen legislatively? And that hasn't ever been something that, rose to the top. So we all want to be in this committee conscious of what we can do to further the interests of agriculture. At the same time, recognizing that we are not the Farm Bureau. We are here to represent all Vermonters, whether they're farmers or neighbors, and we want to do that in a way that, ideally, it strikes the right balance. Just as far as these 2 points are, I guess I would go back to what Representative Lalonde said, that this is language that's in the law today. It's in the existing law. And yes, I suppose at some point, somebody could bring a claim and it would be difficult to say, what does noxious mean in the context of fever, but I think that it's happened. We didn't hear any testimony that.
That language was written when farmers were doing $3 billion, not 5.8, right? And that was before that we were trying to expand farming across. And that's why we're trying to push farming up to $10 billion instead of where it is. So are we going to stick with language that doesn't fit what today's farmers are doing? Or are we going to be brave as ag committees and what the ag industry means to the state of Vermont? Are we going to try to craft language to support an industry?
Yeah, interestingly, we looked at, and we had Ledge Council walk us through the findings section of the intent at the beginning. And I knew it had been brought to my attention that it was back in the early 2000s, 20 years ago, when the last time this was updated. And Senator Shears was part of that conversation. So I said, this intent language is 20 years old. And it looks like it could have been written today. It actually is expressing the same concerns, the same worries that farms will be driven out of business, that there will be a need to change the types of farms. So that's actually in the intent. It's right here that you may need to change farms. But interestingly, the legislation didn't allow for that. So I think we are making an adjustment there that serves that point. This is actually from the 80s. Is that what you found, Mike, with this language?
So yeah, the early 90s, 93, I believe.
From the 90s, okay. So yeah, I mean that's I think that the House position, as I said, is this was a compromise. This was a compromise in this committee. I don't know if we have Rachel on the floor today. I think we could probably push it through.
Let's try it. Let's change this language.
I'm saying without, I'm not going to be able to go to the floor and say we have a different bill, but I could say we have the same bill. I'm sure
the same bill doesn't work for us. The same bill is not even close. We're talking, we put a bill over to you, which is a good bill, and you guys have changed it, and we're here to try to figure out a way to compromise on it. And you're saying that there's no compromise.
Yeah, I know. I realized that if you had thought that it was the right bill, you would have concurred with it. And I understand that that's your position.
In your view, if I may,
Sure. Yeah.
2 and 3, if they were gone,
I don't see, they don't have to be gone. Adjusted. Let's get rid of the word. Let's get rid of the word of noxious. Let's find a different way to say it differently so that it isn't quite so subjective. We do want people who are bothered to be able to make a complaint if that's really where it's at. But let's make it so that it's not so obnoxious. Let's make it so it's a better word in there so that it's not so subjective. It's that the way that is worded is that automatically that person is going in and making a claim that the farmer's in violation.
We had, I think a reaction when we first heard about this, bill. May have been a premature reaction, but it was and I often have this question, what problem are we trying to solve here? Where is the problem? And it wasn't that, the problem is not that farmers are being sued. We don't, I mean, the evidence is pretty clear on that. Problem, and I think this is a legitimate problem, is that farmers are afraid they're going to be sued. And to that, I think many people would say, well, I'm sorry, you can't control how you feel or what your fears are. We said, okay, we hear you, we're going to make some changes. And here's a big beginning of the bill that shifts the burden onto the plaintiff. So that fear that you're going to be sued should be somewhat less of a fear, because now the plaintiff is going to have to take the initiative rather than the farmer.
And I stopped you as far as on your comments, and I apologize for that.
My further thought was, do you have some other sample wordings that we might all consider that might be acceptable to all of us and still do what we want to do?
Yeah, if I might, you all going to be on the floor at 5:30? Are you going to?
We will be watching for the red light.
7:30.
7:30, okay.
To 7:30.
Okay, if I might, then I'd ask for a brief recess.
Sure, yeah.